his computer. Cool. Well, welcome again, guys. Sorry about that delay right there, but we are going to go ahead and start out. We're getting back into the swing of things with the webinars. This is part one of choosing your facilities. Part two, just for you guys to save the date, and I'll send out communications and everything like that. Make sure that everybody knows what's going on. Will be 3 weeks from today on March 24th. Same time will be 1 p.m. Central Time. So we'll be hitting part two, but part one today, Mr. Greg's going to talk us through really kind of choosing facilities on the front end, going into a community, looking for your initial location. Part two will be a little bit more of the detailed looking in the future once you're looking at building a building and some of the details in regards to that. So I believe that's kind of part one, part two, and we're going to walk through a few of those things. But without further ado, we'll just let Greg take it from here.
All right. Okay, so yeah, today we're just going to talk about how maybe just more or less finding your first place and or maybe your second or third place if the church is growing before you actually purchase a facility and have to go through the process of redoing it, building it out, and or building from scratch. And that's all going to be in part two, like he was just saying. So today we're really just going to stick on. It's almost going to be kind of like a coaching call that I would do with a guy who's just starting out. All right, a couple of things to be looking for. One is that some of this information is going to be based on the idea that some guys make some common mistakes. So it's kind of like landmines of picking a facility. What would one of the landmines be? Well, one is that I'll be coaching a guy who I say, well, what do you want to launch? And they say, oh, I want to launch with 200 guys, 200 people in my church on launch day. Okay, great. And the next thing I know is that they've picked a facility that seats 100. So you can automatically do the math and realize that's a mistake. All right, so why do guys do that? Well, for the most part, guys are doing that because they're starting to pick things that are driven by finance instead of driven by vision. All right. That to me, that's a big landmine that, man, if you're taking notes today, this is the first one you really want to get down. The mistake is that people pick a place based on budget instead of vision. You gotta work the other way around. You got to be able to pick something for your vision. Or there's this thing that we call the small church syndrome. All right. So if you're trying to launch with 200 folks, but you're going to pick a facility that has 100, then you're automatically going to be in the small church syndrome, or you're going to have to launch with 2 services. Now, I'm never opposed to a church launching with 2 services because the people don't know any different when you're starting something from scratch. So why not? Who cares? Let's start with 2 services. But you have to be able to have the bandwidth to be able to do that from day one. That means your children's team has to be prepped and ready to go with 2 services from day one. That means your worship team from day one. Your setup and tear down team, you've got to have guys who are going to be ready to stay there for 2 hours. Really, in reality, more like 3 to 3.5 hours. So the amount of work is going to double, obviously, because you got 2 worship services. So you got to pick the right facility from day one. So so here's a few other little knick-knack things that are in this process. It wasn't too long ago that a building was full at 80% of capacity. So if you had a seating capacity of 100, then it's going to be full at 80. However, since the invention of all these devices, we've actually become more distant from each other. People can be texting each other within their own household. It's amazing what these things have done to change our dynamic as to how we work with people and relate to people. So the short of what I'm saying here is in the last couple of years, a facility is now full at 70%. We actually like more space between us than we've ever liked before. So if you pick a facility that seats 100, they're going to feel full at 70. Now, you can get away with 100 people on your grand opening, but if you start doing 100 people with 100 seats every single Sunday, you're going to go downhill because people are not going to see the excitement for the long haul. They're going to start bowing out because man, if I show up 5 minutes late, I'm going to have to stand in the back. And, it was like, there's all the reasons in the world for them to not keep showing up, because it's just uncomfortable. That's just the plain and simple reality. Is it's just uncomfortable. So if you want to be able to launch with 200 people, that means you're going to have a facility that can seat how many? I mean, you can do the math, right? But it's going to be up there. So you're going to be looking at a facility of 300 to 350 that you can be able to do the math on and get to 70% down. So it's going to cost you more to get that kind of facility. So I don't want you to shoot low. We want all of our guys and anybody that's in church planning to shoot high and shoot for the big number and shoot for the big vision. But that means you're going to have to just pay out some more money and get a better facility. All right. So multiple services in a smaller venue. We just kind of talked about that. But what I would say about that kind of a thing here, again, here's the small like tidbit things again. I call them thresholds. So if you're in a facility that seats 100, then you're going to be full at 70. So what I normally tell guys is this: if you start hitting 50, you need to start sitting down with your team and you need to start deciding it's time to go to 2 services. Because when you start hitting 60 and 70, then you're going to be full, correct? So that means at about 60, somewhere between 60 and 70 in average attendance, you're going to have to pull the trigger and go to 2 services. And you can't be afraid to do that. And you can't fool yourself into thinking, oh, I'm going to max it out at 80. I'm going to get 90 people in here. Here's what's going to happen. Every time you hit 90, you're going to drop down the next week. And you're going to hit 90 and you're going to drop down the next week. And you're going to keep doing that because you're never going to get to that full capacity of 100. Just because, again, the nature of the people. Now, of course, there's always going to be that anomaly that can do that. But for the most part, as soon as you start hitting your maximum number, you start to see wild range in attendance, because people are just going to sit there and say, I'm not going there if I have to stand in the back, or I'm not going to go there if I'm going to have to sit next to, a person on each side of me. It's just uncomfortable. If you think about it, when you go, like if you ever ride a train or ride some sort of public transportation system, everybody wants a seat in between them. If you go to a theater today, back in the 70s and maybe early 80s, people loved going to a packed out theater. Like I remember seeing movies when I was a kid, and it was seat to seat, everybody was sitting in there, and it was a packed out movie theater. Craig Groeschel, I think everybody knows that name, Craig Groeschel. He began teaching a couple years ago, and he said, if you think about it today, when you go to a movie theater, almost every movie theater is always half empty. And people kind of almost enjoy the idea that they've got the theater to themselves, because what do movie theaters do today? They start showing movies at 9 a.m. and they don't stop till midnight, and they'll show the same daggum movie in 4 or 5 different theaters. Every half hour, there's that same movie is starting in some other theater, because people want choices, and people don't want to be able to be confined and sit next to somebody in every single situation. So people like their space today. So again, you're going to have to pick the threshold depending upon what the seating capacity is of the facility that you have. But somewhere around, I would say 50 to 60% capacity, you've got to start sitting down with your team and saying, okay, when we hit 70%, we're going to 2 services. And don't think twice about it. Don't bat an eye about it. Don't let somebody talk you out of it. You got to go to 2 services when you start hitting 70% of capacity. All right. If you look at that next bullet down, it says the finances of choosing a facility. But before we even talk finances of choosing a facility, what I want to tell you is this: as soon as you are up and running as a church, and as soon as you start receiving offerings from your congregation, you have to immediately work with your management team and open up an account with some sort of banking institution. Now, I believe in the partnership. You see them there on the outline. CFR stands for Church Financial Resources. Solomon is the Solomon Foundation. And if you just look up Solomon, you're not going to find it. It has to be the Solomon Foundation. And CDF stands for Church Development Fund. All right. So those three groups are financial institutions. They're kind of like a loan corporation, and they work only with churches, and they work only with churches that are of our Christian church, independent Christian church brand of churches. They are very accommodating to help give you money to get the building or the structure that you need. All three of these entities. Now, these three guys, I'll just tell you some of the other ins and outs and the pros and cons of these guys. Their interest rate is going to be higher. I'll just flat out tell you that right now. The bank is going to give you a better interest rate. However, we live in a day where post 2008, when the economy crashed, the secular bank, is going to be more inclined to call your note if you don't make a payment. If you skip a payment, miss a payment, they're not going to care anymore these days. So after 2008, they started calling notes on churches if they missed a payment. And you don't want to be in that position. I would highly encourage you to interview all three of these entities and determine and pick the one that you like the best. Nexus does not pick one over the other. We encourage you to interview all three. Now, so here's the con side of this, though. You're going to pay a higher interest rate for your loan with these guys, but it is pretty rare. Like literally the blue moon when they ever call a note on anybody. They're going to be more inclined to work with your note, massage whatever they need to massage, and make sure that you stay in your facility, because they are about building the kingdom, not about their assets that are sitting in the bank. So that's why we highly recommend these guys. My church has a loan. We have it with one of these guys. And again, the other cool thing about this is this. With a secular bank, they're also going to be the guys who give a loan to put the liquor store on the corner or put the new porn shop on the corner, whereas these three entities are never going to invest in those kind of things. They're only going to invest in Christian churches, Christian schools, colleges, or universities, or anything that a church might be doing that is going to benefit its community and help them build that kind of facility. So that's why you see us talk about these guys. I think I'm going to save some of those other things for the second one. But what I'll also tell you is this. If you lease a facility that requires a build out, you cannot get a loan on a leased facility. Right? That's a critical thing that you guys need to know. So if you find a 10,000 square foot facility and it requires build out, and it's going to require maybe $100,000 worth of build out, nobody's going to give you a loan on a building that you lease, because you've got no collateral. So you're going to have to do it yourself, or muster up all of the volunteers and get the job done yourselves, or call on other churches and get a whole bunch of teams together and like do an old-fashioned barn raising, because you're not going to get a loan to get it done. Which means if you're going to lease a facility that is of that size and you have to do a build out, you have to make sure you have enough money in the bank to get the build out done. You're also going to have to work with the city and jump through all kinds of hoops to make sure you pass all kinds of city codes, and that's going to cost you as well. So it's not just, oh, it's going to cost us $50,000 to build this building out and kind of refurbish it. No, it's going to cost you probably $70,000, because A, there's always overruns, and B, there's going to be a lot of other fees that you're going to have to pay the city to be able to get the thing passed so that you can get your certificate of occupancy. So it's always more than what the contractor is going to give you the estimate on, because that's just the work. You got to pull the permits and everything else. It's quite an involved process. If you've never done anything like it before, anyway, it's quite an involved process, and you're about to get a real good education that Bible college didn't teach you. Um, all right. Is there another page of notes to this one? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if this is just for part 2 or what Spark put together, but
Okay. Well, I can still go with some of this stuff right here. All right. So what do you choose, and how do you find these places? Let's talk about that. Okay. You can find an old church that has maybe gone belly up. The only thing that I would caution you on in that kind of scenario is that even though the church has gone belly up, its history and its past has not gone belly up, and the whole community still knows the past and the history of that particular church. And so they are never going to really see you as your own entity. They're going to see you as the last church that was there. That's just the nature of the game. That's the way it goes. So be careful as to if you choose an old church facility, and make sure you do a really good, thorough investigation about how that church was perceived in the community. But that's one option. Another option is I sometimes encourage guys to go look at gymnasiums, such as like maybe your local club volleyball team, like a girls volleyball club team that has all age brackets and junior Olympic type brackets. I mean, like I'm talking about a serious kind of volleyball situation where they have a huge amount of space. You might want to go investigate one of those places. I would also check out maybe large karate type facilities and or cheer or dance team type facilities. Most of those places obviously have big rooms, and you might be able to rent those things on a Sunday morning. And almost any one of those guys might appreciate the extra money that they could get in rent for their facility. You have the top two things over the last several years have been movie theaters and schools. So movie theaters are a good deal, but the way they do movies these days, they still start pretty early now, even on a Sunday. So you might have a time constraint. So be careful. Make sure you do a really good, thorough investigation as to the theater that you might rent and how fast do they want you out. The other thing about movie theaters is you don't necessarily get to use their big screen. So you might have to pay extra for a tech guy to be there and run your tech stuff, your slides, whatever, your announcements. It's going to be kind of cool to have it on a big, humongous screen in a movie theater, but you might have to pay for someone to do that for you. You still might have to have your own sound equipment to move into a movie theater. So it doesn't necessarily exempt you in thinking that you have all of these things to your liking because you're in a movie theater. There are some movie theaters that do have handheld mics that are already built into the system. So again, just check the cost and see how much that's going to set you back when you do that kind of a thing. The schools, let me tell you about the schools here real quick. If you pick the schools, if you pick an elementary school, then you also might have the ability to pick up some of those families because you're going to have signs, you're going to have banners. You're probably going to be partnering with that school, which means you're going to be able to have some flyers that are going to be put in the backpacks on Friday. And so therefore you might have easy access to some easy pickings on some families that would join your church. However, if you've ever had kids, you got to remember the process. When your kids are in elementary school, you don't necessarily have a whole lot of money, but you have a lot of time because it's your kids. And so you volunteer a lot. So if you pick an elementary school and if you pick a great deal of population from that school, then you're going to have a whole bunch of volunteers in your hands, but you may not have a whole lot of offering on your hands, but you're going to have a whole lot of people willing to do a whole lot of things. If you pick a high school, if you remember the high school days, then they have more money now, but they don't volunteer as much. So they give their kids the car keys and they say, go to school. See you when you get back. So you're going to have a less of a volunteer base, but you're going to have higher offerings. So as you can tell, I left out the middle school or the junior high, and that's kind of your sweet spot. So if you're going to pick a school, I would highly encourage you to go to a junior high or a middle school. Why? That's because you're going to have parents who are kind of right in the middle. They're about to get the bigger promotions. They're going to have a little bit more money in their pocket. They might have a sibling that's in high school, but they're still going to have some siblings that might be in elementary school. So they haven't forgotten how to volunteer. And they have a little bit more resources to give an offering, which you're going to need both in a church plant, obviously. So pick wisely. A junior high facility obviously is built for a larger crowd, but it is not necessarily overwhelming from a high school theater arts complex. So sometimes they call them the PAC, Performing Arts Center. A high school performing arts center, depending on the size of your schools in your area, could seat anywhere from 700 to 1,500 people. So if you're starting a brand new church, do you really want 50 people in a theater that seats 1,500? So just think it through. But the junior high or the middle school then might be more in your sweet spot. Along with that is the same kind of information that I gave you about the theater. Just make sure that you have access to their equipment, and are there extra fees to have somebody there to run their equipment? Do you have access to their tables? Do you have access to their chairs, or do you have to go out and buy a whole bunch of chairs? If you have to go out and buy a whole bunch of chairs, man, I always tell guys, look, leave the high dollar chairs alone. Go to Sam's and buy yourself some white Lifetime chairs. They're $19 usually on average, and they're going to last you a good couple of years. They're not going to last you a lifetime, but they're going to last you a good couple of years because it's a lot of wear and tear on these chairs to set them up and tear them down every single week, depending on your rented facility. But it's a wide chair, and it's a rather comfortable chair. And if you think about it, if you have your people stand for worship and song, then that means they're really only having their butts in the seat for maybe 30 minutes of that hour. So it's very doable at that point in time in a white Lifetime chair. Now, I'm not talking about those cheap, cheesy wedding rental chairs. I'm talking about a good solid Lifetime chair. It's again, it's a little extra wide, and it fits comfortably most people. So that's where you can find some facilities. Now, another potential facility are going to be your national brand preschools, such as maybe like Lighthouse. I forget some of the national brands right now, but like KinderCare, Lighthouse, those kind of guys. You might want to go check out one of those kind of facilities. Now, the cool thing about those facilities is that they usually have a room that can accommodate 100 people. They usually have a playground that they'll allow your kids to go play on. So those are some doable places. Other places that are not usually used too often, but you can't rule them out, are going to be like a community event center, either at a park complex or maybe at an actual neighborhood. Like maybe you have a master plan community in your area, and they have every master plan community area has a rec center with a swimming pool and a park. And some of them, depending on who the builder is, are going to be really nice places. So you don't want to leave those places off. And you also, these would be probably like the last two places that I would go to, but you could also look at an apartment complex, the center there where the offices are and the pool is. Sometimes, depending on the apartment complex, especially the newest ones that are made, have really nice facilities for the residents that are living there. They got pool tables. They've got a large facility for people. They sometimes do community meals there. And of course, they got the pool, so you can do your baptisms. So that's another option to you as well. So you don't want to leave everything off the table, but I would put more like those things into your last resort. Now, like we got a church plant right now that's in a bar in South Dakota, Sioux City, Iowa, and so those are possibilities as well. it's not a bar like it's like a honky tonk type bar. It's more like a family style bar. It's a nice facility. It's a downtown facility, but nonetheless, it's still a bar. So don't leave these things off the table as well. You got to find a place that's going to be high visibility. Obviously, I think that should go without saying. You don't want people to have to try and find you. That you want to be right out front and be visible for everybody. Um, let's see, what size facility? So you heard me talk about. I was saying 10,000 square feet. Um, you really don't want to pick a facility that's about less than 7,500 square feet. I think 10,000 square feet is kind of the sweet spot for a new church getting started. Usually in a facility of 10,000 square feet, you're going to have the ability to have a small lobby area, maybe 2 or 3 classroom type facilities within there. And you should be able to get yourself, depending on the build out of how you do it, maybe seating for 250 in a 10,000 square foot facility. So if you get a 10,000 square foot facility, it's going to be, so this is where I talk about all these extra costs that nobody ever mentions to you, but it's going to be worth it for you to maybe take it to somebody who can do like a CAD drawing and do a couple of design features for you. It's going to cost you a little bit of money, but you know what? You're going to be so much better down the road to have it designed so that you can kind of see it before you build it and you know exactly what you're getting. The other thing that I would highly encourage you, and I know I'm spitting out a whole bunch of stuff right now. We're going to do some Q&A here in just a minute, but keep things large. So I have a saying that I say to guys when I coach them, which is this. You can't make small big, but you can make big small. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you build yourself 4 10 by 10 classrooms for Sunday school, guess what? Those will always and forever be Sunday school. You can't ever do anything else with it. But if you leave your room at 100 by 100, then on Sunday you can make your classrooms 10 by 10. You can get a couple of those in there, but as soon as church is done, you can put the walls away, and now you got yourself a youth room for Wednesday night, or you've got yourself a community room for a Tuesday night community meeting. You can do all kinds of things. So you can make big small temporarily, but you can't make small big. Once you make a 10 by 10, you're stuck with that 10 by 10. I hope you like it. All right. So you want to stay big on those kind of things as at all possible. Don't do too much in the build out, especially if you're leasing a space, because again, a lease is exactly that. It's a lease. This is not your permanent home. You're not staying here forever. So I would not go over the top in building this thing out. Even if you sign yourself a 5-year contract, don't overbuild. It's not yours. And even if you get like almost like, I guess in the church world, the golden handshake with a guy that says, yeah, I'll give you first right of refusal to purchase this building. That's not a guarantee that he's going to give you the right to purchase that building. That might just be a selling point for him to get you to sign the lease. So again, don't sign a lease thinking that this is for sure yours in 5 years because you've got first right of refusal. It just simply means that if he decides to sell it, well, he has to give you the first choice, but it doesn't mean he's going to ever even sell it. So he just got you to sign a 5-year contract and he's the winner. So be careful for how long you even rent these things. Again, if you are renting a facility that has 100 to 150 seat capacity, I wouldn't sign for more than 2 years, guys, because obviously the intent is what? For us to grow. So why would you want to sign for 5 years in a place that has a seating capacity for 150, unless you want to go to 3 services within 5-year time frame? So you got to think long term, because we always are trying to coach you guys to think long term. You know, what is the ultimate end game on this thing? When I started my church 15 years ago, I thought about what is this church going to look like when I'm dead one day. That's how far out honestly, I'm thinking at all times is whatever I do now is going to impact what's going to happen when I'm dead and the next guy's going to take over. So um, you have to think all the time about what am I leaving in the legacy? Because you don't want to screw the church down the road, and you don't want to screw the next guy either. Um, Hopefully this church is going to last beyond your lifetime. That's the intent of planting our churches. So it shouldn't start with you and die with you. It should have a life beyond you. So be careful about what you sign, and maybe how bad you want that facility. So let me circle back and go back to the very first thing I said is you got to talk to your management team and start putting some money aside and enter a relationship with any banking institution that you want to get. But I'm going to highly recommend the 3 that do church work only. Interview them and start putting money aside with them, because the reason why I'm coming to this again is because they base their loans off how well they know you. That is actually a factor in them deciphering the loan. I hope that makes sense. So they're going to look at your per capita giving. They're going to look at your total offerings that are coming in. They're going to look at projections of growth. But then they also have a factor in their ledgers that say, what do we know about the leader? And if you've established a relationship with these guys for 2 years or 3 years, they're going to go, oh yeah, hey, let's sit down with Jeremy, man. That dude's solid. We know him. We've hung out with him. We've seen him at Nexus things. We've seen him at conferences. We got to get that guy alone because he's got to get to the next level. So I'm going to save the 45 to 80% of your annual budget and all those other kind of things for part 2 of this whole thing on buildings and structures and those kinds of things. So what kind of questions do y'all have? Okay, I'll take it that you don't have any questions.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah. Hey.
We're actually looking at trying to share space with another church. One of the churches we're looking at has a service on Saturday, and they're open on Sunday without anybody else meeting there. There's another church that we actually prefer to share with, but it would be a situation where they would have like an 8:45 or 9 o'clock service, and then we would come in and do an 11 o'clock service. Do you have any insight on something like that? We've tried to think of everything we can under the moon on it, but just curious.
Yeah. I had the privilege of coaching David Lamagnier, and he's been in that situation, and he's still in that situation. It can get kind of sticky. And the reason why it can get kind of sticky is because one of you might grow and one of you might not. And then sometimes there's the conflict because the one that is not is going to feel like maybe the other one has been undermining their potential success. It maybe and maybe not, but it's just the way we feel because we're human. So sometimes it puts us in an awkward spot to think, well, why are they growing and we're not, or we're growing and they're not? They must not be as good as we are. And it's just a natural thing that humans do. So you just got to be careful of that, and you're gonna have to be ready for that for whatever side of the coin you're going to be on. You're either going to be the growing one or you're going to be the one that's stagnant. The other thing too then is just make sure that there is a clear distinction of time and in between time as to when they end and when you start, because since they're the first one to bat, they might linger longer than you need them to be, and they might start infringing on your time for setup, and you're always going to look like the bad guy because you're looking like you're forcing them out of their spot, and they feel like, well, this is our spot, and so you got to be careful with that because you're the second guy. Otherwise, your mailers, all of your Facebook, all of your social media, all of that kind of stuff, you just put it down as if you were the only church that is meeting at that facility. I would never, I know this sounds terrible, guys, but I would never share the billing on a postcard because you're paying for that postcard. So unless you guys want to enter into an agreement that in your stuff that they put your information down and you put their information down, so that you're advertising for both entities, I don't think that's what you're actually entering into. So just be careful of that. So when you do your mailers and all of your social media, I wouldn't necessarily put down, hey, this is us meeting at the same place as these guys. You don't need to make that distinction. Just, this is us and this is where we meet. Does that help you any?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. How much time are you supposed to have in between them finishing and you starting?
There'd be about a half hour to 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
Man, that's going to be tough.
There's a large.
Is there like a back door where they can go out the back door so that you have access to the front door?
They actually go into a Sunday school time at 10:30.
Okay.
And so there is a large lobby space that we could actually hold people, where we'd have we're opening the doors at this time kind of thing. And
all right.
So there are options like that.
Yeah. Yeah. David Lamagna has done this thing really well with the church that they share space with. They share an old movie theater. And, part of the coaching process for him has been, look, you just hang in there because one day you're probably going to buy that whole facility, because they are the growing church where the other one is the stagnant to declining church. And so I think he's going to probably buy that whole entire thing one day. So I don't know the facility that you're talking about, if it's a leased facility or if it's an old church facility.
No, they own it.
What is it?
They own it. It's a Baptist church. It's nice and it's clean. It's
okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think the critical thing for that short of a turnaround is going to be just making sure that you have access to the front doors.
Yeah.
And that you get your own greeters out there to make sure that you get them to the right direction. So I think for you, really, your front door greeter team is going to be your most critical team. Because if Sally Sue comes meandering in off the street, and if there's nobody there to greet her, then she's going to walk into a Sunday school classroom from the Baptist church and she's going to think she's home. And, so does the kingdom win? Yeah, the kingdom wins. But that's just some of the nuances of a shared space with another church that has that short of a turnaround time frame.
Okay.
All right. Good question. Any other questions, guys? So let me ask this then, if you don't have questions, what kind of space are you guys already currently looking at? And what do you think are the pros and the cons of what you're looking at? Okay.
Well, Greg, we took your suggestion, as you know, and we're in a cheer, dance, and tumble gym, and it's working out good for us. But we've gone to 2 services, which is good. I mean, it's increased our attendance quite a bit, which is cool. But we're trying to find something more permanent. Our situation is the cost of property here is really high, and so trying to find something more permanent, even to lease. Leasing is more expensive than buying would be, because you're talking $18 a square foot, and you factor that in if you're doing 10,000 square feet. I'm not that good with math, but it's a lot per month, more than a building payment would be. So that's one of the reasons I want to be on the next call as well, is just kind of figuring out, what do you do if the space you're in is working, but you could do a lot more if you had a more permanent space. You know what I'm saying? Something you could use more than just on Sunday morning.
Yeah. So, in this world of church today, where we are, are like, how big does your church grow before you start planting new churches? And is it a
Right.
sin to be a large church and all that other kind of stuff? Look, I think God's going to do what God's going to do with your church. I think if your church is growing, I don't think that's a sin. I think you just need to facilitate for more growth of your church that's going on. So if you need a bigger facility, go out and get yourself a bigger facility. I think though that I just have a lot of sayings, I guess, or Gregisms, as sometimes the guys say. But
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I think when you start running about 200, I think that's when you're kind of done with the leasing thing. I think you need to go out and either buy an old facility that you can renovate, but you actually own it, or you go out and buy yourself some acreage and you build on your own acreage. I think without stepping toes too much on the next time we do this, I would just quickly say this: if you have to look at who you are and what you think God is doing with you and through you. Are you a campus style guy that has multiples of buildings and does multiples of things within the community, or are you a discipling, sending them out kind of a guy? So, like, if you're a send them out kind of guy, you don't need really more than 5 acres of land. So you can buy something a whole lot quicker and get something built a whole lot faster, because you probably don't need a worship auditorium that seats more than 300. And
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we know who we are. If you're a campus style guy, that means you probably need 25 acres or more. I'll just simply put it that way, 25 plus, because you're going to have probably room for a softball field and multiples of buildings and those kinds of things. That's going to be harder to get your hands on. But you could maybe buy the land and at least sit on it for a bit. And there's some things I'll give you that you can do with that next month or whatever, at the end of this month, whatever the time is. But there's some things that you can do with that while you hold that land. But I really do think that at about 200 in average attendance, it's time to get out from the leasing, because you're just going to pay a whole lot of money in leasing than you are in your own facility, as you already described. So,
Yeah.
Again, here's the thing. Even as you get your own land and build your own facility, you're not building the Taj Mahal as your first building. You're probably going to build maybe still a little bit of an upgrade, maybe a 12,000 square foot facility or a 15,000 square foot facility. But it just advances you that much more so that you can continue the process of growing. And the reason why I kind of picked this 200 mark is this. It's another saying that I say with a lot of the guys, but as soon as you stall that engine, man, that's when problems start. An engine is not necessarily made to turn on and shut off and turn on and shut off and turn on and idle and then shut off and then turn on and off. And I mean, an engine is made to run and then just run. And you just keep the oil in it and keep the thing maintained, and that sucker should just be able to run forever. You want to just keep the church running. And so if it's growing, then ride that wave of growth, as Rick Warren used to say. But heaven forbid that you and I be the one that actually stalls the engine, because then I would say shame on us. And you also run the risk of going back to the small church syndrome, which is, well, what happened? We stalled at 75. Well, maybe you stalled at 75 because you didn't do 2 services in that facility that's at 100. By your own design, you stalled the engine. So we have to keep the engine running, and we are the ones. Look, I don't like this in some sense, but like, again, I tell a lot of guys, and I remember telling you that you are the only one who sleeps, eats, and breathes this church, and you're the only one that has to think far out. Nobody else is thinking about tomorrow with this church, and nobody else is thinking 5 years from now with this church. The only other person that might be doing that is your spouse. Otherwise, it's pretty much you that's thinking about 5 years from now. And if you're not even thinking about 5 years from now, well, then chances are you're going to stall at 75 because you didn't think beyond year one. So I know I stress a lot about thinking ahead and planning ahead, but really that's oftentimes the difference between a church that stagnates at whatever number and the church that continues to grow. So yeah, to recap that answer to you, I would say as soon as a church gets to about 200, it is time to put aside the lease and go out and get yourself a permanent home. Because like if you guys go back and think, and I don't know how old some of you guys are, but if you go back to the day of Rick Warren, Rick Warren always made the statement, I'm never going to purchase land and build a building. I'm forever going to lease because that's the way of the future. Well, what did he do? He went out and bought himself 100 acres and he built himself a campus. So even the guy who wrote the book on Don't Buy Land is the guy who ended up buying land and built a campus style church. So
Thanks, man. That's good. That helps.
Yeah. So like right now for me and my church, I'm starting the process right now of thinking, okay, where's the next 5 to 10 acres of land that I can build that I can buy now for the church that we're going to plant in the next couple of years, because I buy that land now. So maybe hopefully as you guys get 10, 15 years into your churches, you'll be able to start the process of going, okay, so where do we buy the next parcel of land? Because when we can start doing that, then that's when we can really expedite church planting, because now we're not just starting a church and go, hey, good luck, man. Do it the way I did it. It's, hey, we've got, we already have 10 acres of land. Now we just got to find the guy, and we can put them light years ahead of us. So, all right. I'm coming up on 3 minutes of the hour, but I can stay on and talk to anybody any much longer. Andrew, do you have to close us out? What do we do now?
Yeah. Well, any last questions? Kevin, Jeremy, Matthew, anything?
Yeah, I got a thought. We're at a place where we've hit our 70% capacity, but we have a family integrated style worship just because our facility completely limits the ability to be able to have any kind of youth service going on or children's thing going on at the same time. And if it's 70% capacity for, once you've hit 70%, you're kind of maxing out. I would say if you have kids in the mix, like preschool age kids in the gathering with you, it's probably like 50% maxed out.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So that was just kind of a little thought, and I wondered if you had any feedback on that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Yeah, if you do a family style worship, then yeah, it limits your growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so if whatever you find in the next facility, you can either keep going with what you've done and just get yourself a bigger place that you can keep doing the family style worship, or you don't necessarily have to, or on the flip side, you don't necessarily have to go out and get yourself that much of a bigger place, because maybe the next bigger place has at least 2 or 3 classrooms, and it allows you to grow just by the sake that you have a place for the kids now. So, at that point in time, maybe you find yourself a seating capacity of 150 compared to 100, but you don't have kids in there anymore. It's a game changer.
Mm.
So you don't necessarily have to go out and find a 400 seat facility. You might just need 50 more.
Mm. Yeah.
So as far as the finances are concerned on that kind of a thing, you don't necessarily have to break the bank to go find the next bigger thing. Just maybe 50 more seats, but 2 or 3 classrooms.
Yeah. Good thoughts. That's kind of where we are. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Any last thoughts, questions, concerns? Cool.
Okay, so if you don't mind, let me quickly tell you what we're going to do the next time around. Is we're going to look at actually what you build, how you build it, what are the requirements to get financing for it, how big is too big, where do we get this land, or what kind of big box do we buy, how do we build it out, since if we're going to renovate, how do we build out from scratch, and if we're going to build from scratch, how do we just do it right from day one. and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of what to put in your facilities and what not to put in your facilities. So that's kind of a bit about what we'll do next time around.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks guys for jumping in. Sorry about the little glitch on the intro, but glad that you guys are joining us and valuing this time. So we'll stop this, and I'll put it on our Nexus website so that you guys can check it out or share it with other people that might be interested in some of this content. So yeah, appreciate you guys being on the call.
All right. Take care, guys.
See you in a few weeks.